All right, on to another topic now that actually, Dr. Wajda, you have discussed with us before. After the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting, the aftermath, we learned that the shooter, Adam Lanza, was obsessed with violent video games. The vast majority of American parents, 9 in 10, say violence in video games is a problem. But can playing violent video games result in violent behavior? Reporter Chad Oliver took that question to the researchers who study people, patterns, and the games being played.
Well, I just won, so now we just restart the level.
Teresa Himmer watches when and what her 3 kids play.
Mostly racing games.
Skateboard extreme. Football and sports.
As for violent video games,
It's not really that bloody, the games that I play.
they're not allowed.
I want them to get the reality that when you use a gun and you shoot it at somebody, a lot of times the people aren't going to get back up.
Oh, headshot!
In the gaming world, death is often celebrated. Players receive points for kills and headshots.
A machine gun? Oh, I need to get that for sure.
But does violence on screen lead to aggression in real life?
I think the research has pretty consistently established that relationship's there.
Dr. Marty Bourgeois cites studies going back to the 1970s.
They pretty consistently show that kids who play more violent video games tend to be more aggressive.
Just don't mention the P word.
Scientists don't prove anything.
Dr. Bourgeois is quick to point out limitations to the research.
We can't say that that individual, because we know he played violent video games, we can't say that that caused that behavior. That's not the way science works.
There is no silver bullet.
Psychologist Chris Ferguson sits on the Vice President's Task Force on Gun Control.
The studies have gone back and forth in trying to answer that question, and there's inconsistencies there.
He says there are too many unknown variables among players and games that blur the question of do games cause violence.
I think we need to ask more questions about how people play video games rather than the content of video games.
How the game is played has been trending towards single-player shooters. The American Academy of Pediatrics encourages children to play games involving 2 players, warning too much time absorbed in violent fantasy may foster social isolation.
While science studies group patterns, individual action is unpredictable. Yet there is one thing researchers agree on.
Any human behavior, whether it's, helping someone cross the street or engaging in a school shooting, there's no one cause for any human behavior.
Even in the Himmer house, where violent games are banned,
Not in my house. I don't let them play that here.
Mom doesn't blame violence on video games.
If there's already a problem, I think it can exacerbate that problem, but I don't think that it causes that problem.
Stay tuned. Plenty more Central Valley Today straight ahead.
It's not just a feeling, but a fact. It has gotten worse. 5 of the 12 deadliest mass shootings in U.S. history have happened in the last 4 years.
As a nation, we have endured far too many of these tragedies in the last few years. An elementary school in Newtown, a shopping mall in Oregon, a house of worship in Wisconsin, a movie theater in Colorado, countless street corners in places like Chicago and Philadelphia. Any of these neighborhoods could be our own. So we have to come together, and we're going to have to take meaningful action to prevent more tragedies like this from happening, regardless of politics.
In that Aurora theater last July, a gunman wielding a semi-automatic rifle with a 100-round barrel magazine, a shotgun, and a pistol went on a rampage, killing 12 and wounding 58. Shortly afterwards, Colorado's Democratic governor told me stricter gun laws would not have helped.
If there were no assault weapons available, if there were no this or no that, this guy's going to find something, right? He's going to know how to create a bomb.
He seemed different in an interview last Wednesday, 2 full days before the events here in Connecticut. When you look at what happened in Aurora, the governor said a great deal of that damage was from the large magazine on the AR-15 rifle. I think we need to have that discussion and say, where is this appropriate? Joining me now is the governor of Colorado, John Hickenlooper. Governor, thank you so much for joining us today. I know that things are so fresh here in Connecticut, but you have been dealing for several months with the aftermath of what happened in Aurora. I wonder if you have, if I'm misinterpreting you or interpreting you correctly, that maybe you have some slight evolution on what ought to be done in terms of laws involving guns or ammunition.
Well, first, let me just say that the heart of every person in Colorado goes out to every person in Connecticut. That watching Governor Malloy navigate, and I think he's done a remarkable job, but we would, our hearts are breaking here for them. We know exactly how they feel. We've been collecting, and even as they struggle to process this, we've had that distance since the shooting in Aurora and have really tried to look at what are the things that could make a difference and how should we begin this conversation. And things like high-capacity magazines certainly have, that comes up again and again and again. The expanding background checks to make sure that guns don't end up in the wrong people's hands. We had planned a press conference for Tuesday where we have a whole list of efforts, almost $20 million in new programs around trying to put more support for people with mental illness, to make sure that we have a 24-hour hotline that someone can call in if they think someone appears unstable, a danger to themselves or others, making sure we expand capacity in neighborhoods and communities across the state, that we have a place to stabilize people if they appear like they're a threat to themselves or to others. That whole program was all in place, and that's something we can do immediately without getting into some of the battles of gun legalization or gun restricting access to guns in some way. But that discussion of gun safety is going to continue.
I think also, Governor, that you and I, as I recall the time, talked about the fact that someone who isn't in the mental health system, and a number of folks, actually I think yours was the exception, at least in the beginning, but a number of the people, I think particularly in Tucson, had not actually sought out any kind of mental health help. So they wouldn't have been caught up in a system that necessarily would have looked at that in the purchase of guns. We also know that guns are readily available even if you don't purchase them legally. And I think we talked that time about the culture of guns and kind of the culture that we live in now, and that there's very little you can do to stop a determined person. Do you still feel that way?
Well, unfortunately, I think that's true. And you can't really argue those facts. What you can do is expand your capacity, your framework within a state or within the country to have more people paying attention and trying to detect folks that are unstable, on the verge of real trouble, try to catch them at a sooner level. But certainly the culture of violence, and look at the level of violence in our media, video games, the depiction of these assault weapons again and again. There might well be some direct connection between people who have a mental instability, and they when they go over the edge, they transpose themselves. They become part of one of those video games, and perhaps that's why all these assault weapons are used.